Hey, so I guess the summer movie season has officially started. So the time of great movies has begun. That is actually probably not the case, but I did start off this month really well with 2023's BlackBerry. This is a seemingly conventional movie about the startup and flawed operation of BlackBerry, the highly innovative cell phone company that changed the way we communicate, and then it crashed real hard. So this came out during the storm of entrepreneur films where we're supposed to clap for business people making money, and I mean, yeah, some of those movies were pretty good. Some of them were not. But BlackBerry is a much more critical movie than you might think. It's really more about how ambition sometimes makes you sacrifice core elements of yourself and your most important relationships. It doesn't take a detective to realize it's social network inspiration, so it's not like BlackBerry is the most innovative movie thematically, but the filmmaking is the farthest thing from Fincher. This has a mockumentary energy, but not in a gimmicky way at all. It's just a hilarious and often wise movie that at its core is all about movie nights with the bros. And if you haven't seen the movie, then that last part probably made zero sense. But if you have seen the movie, then I guess I hope that it made sense. Thunderbolts is the newest release from the MCU and answers the question, what if Marvel actually cared about making movies again? And you know what? It's really nice. I don't think this is the most unique movie. It really does feel like the Suicide Squad plus Everything Everywhere, and I don't think Thunderbolts is as good as either of them, but I don't really care. This is a really neatly put together script that truly has a heart. Like, the movie is about something, and however unsubtle it is, it's very sincere about it. I agree with some of the criticisms aimed at the color grade in this movie, but there were still many moments of strong visual storytelling in a way that sadly isn't so common in the MCU. Structurally, it's a little wonky with the first act being too long and the second and third act being a little bit too short, making the climax seem a little bit rushed, but I was never really too bothered. I think the score is the best Marvel score since Eternals, and you know, as kind of muted as its box office run has been, I still enjoy when a 4-quadrant movie that makes money is pretty clever and thoughtful. It won't be looked at as one of the best movies of the year, but it'll be looked at as a very pleasant film that was a nice beginning to the summer. I don't really know what got me to revisit It Follows, but I did, and I didn't regret doing it. I think David Robert Mitchell, with this film and his other film Under the Silver Lake, he does a great job at harkening back to older films without losing his own tendencies as a filmmaker. This feels like his singular vision despite having some obvious past fingerprints. And even though some of its influences are obviously seen aesthetically, I think the real point of inspiration here is the slower pace that wasn't all that common in horror films in 2014. And I like where the time is spent. This isn't purely an on-the-run movie like its premise would have you believe. Some of it works almost like Richard Linklater type conversations between this cast of awkward teen characters. I'm not saying that this movie is as funny or as insightful as some of Linklater's work, but the fact that there is a bit of a common energy, I mean, I think that that's pretty cool. But I also don't want to undercut just how tense some of the scenes are in this movie. The mythology and rules are maybe not the most thorough. I mean, if you think too hard about how you could defeat the entity, like, you know, you'll probably run into some walls. But it turns out that just some random person walking up to you is scary as fuck. So who cares if not all of it makes sense? I finally got to watch Nashville at a movie theater, and it just felt so good. This is one of my favorite films, and to see it on the big screen with a decent crowd was a really fun time. As this portrait of America epic comedy, there's nothing totally like it. I mean, explaining Nashville to people who don't know anything about it, it's just a losing battle. Nashville is its own thing. It's just as idiosyncratic and random as the country it's trying to encapsulate. It has the perfect amount of satire tagged along some scenes that strike you as more real than anything you'll watch this year. I don't really know how this perfect concoction of a movie was made, and I really don't know if it can be completely replicated. It's just so spontaneous, it's so poetic, it's just so everything. So if you don't like Nashville, I mean, what the fuck? Frances Ha is one of the most undeniable movies of the 2010s. I don't really know if any 50-year-old dad is gonna be turning on Frances Ha, but like, it's pretty damn sweet. I get that it might feature a little bit too much quirk, but I like how confident this film is. And I would say more, but I'm about to release a video about Noah Baumbach's filmography, so just wait a little bit for that. I watched Hot Fuzz for the first time since high school, and I was honestly scared to return to it because the Cornetto trilogy were some of my favorite movies growing up, but I don't really know why I doubted it because, of course, this movie is a banger. It's a well-oiled machine that knows exactly what it wants to do and how to do it. Sometimes it feels like a joke-a-minute comedy, and throughout, it totally is. But it also has horror elements and is actually a greatly critical film toward rural versus urban stereotypes. Like, the villains in this film have a clear philosophy that the film genuinely seems interested in, even if most of that interest is displayed comedically. And obviously, because of the way that I view movies, I am focusing on the script, but it also can't be understated how original Edgar Wright's highly kinetic filmmaking is. Like, just the amount of images that he curates to cut together with this energy is incredibly impressive. There aren't many movies like Edgar Wright movies, so while they're here, I don't know how we can't appreciate them. Clown in a Cornfield had a pretty boring first half. It's a very standard teens are dumb in a small town while a clown kills people in pretty typical horror ways. But at the midpoint, there are a couple twists that really surprised me, and not really in a plotty way. The reveals actually made me think more about the characters and themes in a way that I was just not expecting. Because as this is from the filmmaker behind Tucker and Dale vs. Evil, I think it's pretty fair to say that there's a lot of satire here. And while in Tucker and Dale it was more city versus rural, here it's satirizing generational differences. And maybe satire is a little bit too strong of a word. Like, structurally it's very standard and the film goes back and forth on whether its carnage is comedic or not, but I would say that overall the film has its tongue in its cheek. And so while I probably won't revisit this, I think it's fine enough and it was a little more thoughtful than I initially thought it would be. So I don't really know what I expected when I rewatched Austin Powers, The Spy Who Shagged Me, but sadly I didn't have a great time. And you might be saying, well, of course you didn't. But I have a secret, okay? Whenever I was 10 years old, you know, little Leighton wandering around the world, these films, they kind of defined my taste in comedy. And there were still 5 or so jokes that still hit hard, and I was laughing harder than anybody probably should. But most of the time, I was just a little bit bored. This doesn't bring me any pleasure, but because the scenes are so long, if a bit isn't working all that well, then you're kind of just sitting thinking about your life choices, and you know, that's never great. And obviously, because of the fact that Mike Myers plays a lot of people in this movie, the coverage is very limited, and it often feels like an SNL sketch. But even though I'm kind of hating, there's no denying that Fat Bastard is funny. And I forgot that Will Ferrell was in this movie, but his scene was hilarious. So if you just want a couple good laughs, go look up clips on YouTube, but I don't really think there's a whole lot to get out of the whole film. Maybe the first film holds up better, but at least for a bit, sadly, I just don't think that I'm gonna find out. Okay, so I heard the quickest way for someone to not like you is to talk about a Woody Allen movie, but I gotta talk about a Woody Allen movie. Hannah and Her Sisters is one of Woody Allen's films that I hadn't seen until now, and it's often looked at as one of his best, and I would technically agree with that. I think it's intriguing that Woody Allen has really only made 1 or 2 different types of movies across his vast filmography, but he's good at making those types of movies. The dialogue is very much his, the heavily blocked long takes are very much his. I think he probably looks at movies like Clockwork with the script and performances really being the only variables. But I think that Clockwork approach results in some very comforting movies, and Hannah and Her Sisters is one of his most measured. It of course features memorable characters and a lot of wit, but I think as with most other Woody Allen movies, it just works as a stroll through New York. And you know, sometimes a stroll through New York just feels really nice. Alongside Hard Eight, Inherent Vice is really the only Paul Thomas Anderson film that isn't seen as a masterpiece, at least in some way, but I'm here to say, I think that it's a masterpiece. Now, Inherent Vice isn't as outwardly important as There'll Be Blood or Magnolia, but I like whenever it seems like Paul Thomas Anderson actually had fun making a movie. Structurally, this is very rigid. It's very scene-based, with Joaquin Phoenix talking with different odd characters all connected to a plot that you couldn't understand on a first, second, or third watch. I've seen this movie like 5 times, and don't ask me what happened. But I'm not really troubled with that because ultimately, like Licorice Pizza, this predominantly works as period portraiture. This movie isn't as interested in these characters or this plot as much as it's interested in everything surrounding it. It's about Nazis, it's about cults, it's about stoners, it's about real estate moguls. Is it the most 70s thing of all time? Maybe. I get when people just write this movie off because for a mystery, it doesn't seem to care about the mystery, but I think there's something more subtle going on here that while maybe it entrances more than it compels, I'm into it. I decided to give Something's Gotta Give a chance in honor of its place in the Big Picture's 25 for 25, and I wish I could show solidarity with Amanda and Sean, but I really can't, although I do see the appeal. Like, this is a good movie that surprisingly has more bite than you would expect, but I honestly think that demographically, I am a black sheep to Something's Gotta Give. I think all these characters involved in this increasingly strange love pentagon are charismatic and worth being around, but thematically, I am just not the target. And I know that this is kind of a hot take on the internet, but I'm thinking that it's okay that not every movie is made for me. I think I can live with that. But on the other hand, if Something's Gotta Give, Mallrats should be a movie made for me. As I've kind of talked about on this channel, I am a big fan of the 90s wave of independent cinema, and obviously Kevin Smith's Clerks was a big part of that. And I like Clerks well enough, and so I thought I should probably give this a shot. But it's just not all that good. I think the idea of a movie mostly taking place in a mall is a great idea. And this movie does that, but it barely uses it to its advantage. This movie should feel electric and lively, but the mall is super plain and Kevin Smith's coverage is so minimal and lacks curiosity. A couple of times it's able to accomplish a vibe, but usually the sadly flimsy dialogue is shot through one dead-on angle with there only being a wall in the background, and it gets pretty old and is pretty puzzling considering the bump up in budget from Clerks. I do think this movie's heart is in the right place. Like, even though there are some cultural things that don't really hold up, ultimately I think the film is well-meaning. I think. And this was pretty basic boy humor of the time and certainly spoke to some audience members, and even now, a chuckle is occasionally granted, but most of the time, all that's warranted is a groan. Okay, so before the new Karate Kid movie comes out that I don't really give a shit about, I thought I should probably rewatch the Karate Kid from my childhood. And yes, that is the one with Jaden Smith. Before Jaden Smith's, or rather during Jaden Smith's years of talking about the socioeconomic state of the world, he made The Karate Kid, a remake of the 1984 classic in which it's pretty much the same, but this time it takes place in China. And I mean, I'm not trying to get too political here, but they made the Karate Kid a black character. So sadly, I think the Karate Kid might be DEI. I'm just kidding, because that would be stupid. But seriously, imagine if the other Karate Kid films didn't come out and Cobra Kai didn't come out and they just said, today we're making a new Karate Kid and the Karate Kid is a black character. Truth Social? They would have blown the fuck up. Now, concerning the actual movie itself, it's fine, I guess. It's way too long and the romantic chemistry is really rough, but part of that is because it's like 12-year-olds in middle school, so it's not exactly the most natural, but the action filmmaking is surprisingly great, and Jackie Chan is a good screen presence. Also, I think Jaden Smith is actually pretty good in the movie. I don't love admitting that, but I mean, it's true. So I guess this movie is okay, and if it worked as like an anti-bullying PSA for my generation, then that's cool. But did it really have to be 2 hours and 20 minutes? I think not. Apollo 10.5 is a much better kids movie, despite it not really being a kids movie. This is one of Richard Linklater's most recent films, and I just love it. I say it's not really a kids movie because even though it's told through this framing device of a child imagining himself during the moon landing, mechanically the film is just nostalgic episodes during the space race, featuring such specific details that only Richard Linklater could conjure them up. And while I'm not usually the biggest fan of rotoscope animation, it being used to enhance the more dreamlike, memory-based atmosphere works for me. And it also works practically because then you can feature any period element you'd like to without having to actually create it physically. I gotta say that this is maybe Richard Linklater's most underrated and is definitely underseen, which is a shame because it's on Netflix. Most people could easily turn it on, but most people just don't really know about it. And sure, it might have seemed like a hard sell on the end of Netflix's marketing team given the animation style and the less than conventional structure, but I don't know who wouldn't get swept away by this movie. It's one of my favorites of the decade so far, for sure. Speaking of incredibly sweet and charming, I also watched Hunt for the Wilder People. So post Thor Love and Thunder, it seems like everyone turned their back on Taika Waititi, but that's just stupid. I don't really care how bad you think Thor Love and Thunder is. watch Hunt for the Wilder People. It's this deeply funny story about a troubled adopted kid finding himself running from the authorities in the woods with his new uncle played by Sam Neill. And what I really like about this movie is how it doesn't really care about genre bounds. I feel like this is jam-packed full of emotions. It's just as funny as the funniest comedies, and it features just as much introspection as some dramas. Honestly, rewatching this movie, it's some of the hardest I've laughed in a long time. And sure, Taika Waititi's films might seem like they have an unserious way of looking at the world, but in actuality, despite how relentless the comedy is purely just a lens through which to look at serious things with. Also, I just think that we need more great movies about adoption. I think that that'd be awesome. Final Destination Bloodline's performance at the box office certainly showed that death is in right now. Like watching a bunch of Rube Goldberg death scenes, that's catnip for sickos. And, yeah, I was one of them. Now, I don't think that I'm as high on this movie as most, but I still had a fun time, and there was a little bit more character than you might expect. I will say that the movie never matches the high of its opening sequence. The opening scene is so good that you're kind of spent whenever the actual body of the film starts. Like, by the last act of the movie, I was kind of over it, but no matter what, those death scenes got me. Creating a death scene in a Final Destination movie is its own skill in the craft of filmmaking, but Zach Lipovsky and Adam Stein get it. And while I don't think I'll be returning to this for quite a while, this was a basic good time, and for a summer blockbuster, I'll gladly take it. Friendship will certainly speak to a very specific audience. I watched this movie opening night and the crowd was excited to be there and they laughed a lot and very loudly. And for the most part, I joined in, especially in the first act, but post the midpoint, I was kind of deflated because I realized that the movie didn't really have enough on its mind to elaborate past the base premise. It's tapping into a weird, subtle incel culture in a way that I was oddly reminded of Joker, and that sounds bad, but in a way that actually enhanced my enjoyment. But I think its most compelling thread is in dissecting the way that men interact, specifically emotionally immature men. But, and this is totally a matter of taste, eventually I found it slightly tiring. And it's not because any of the jokes are bad. Like, I think the second half of the film is just as funny as the first half. I just think that because all of the humor is working on the same level and is hitting the same part of the brain, it kind of just lost its effect on me. I would gladly watch another film by Andrew DeYoung because I think Friendship is really onto something, but it just didn't completely work for me despite the fact that I'm totally glad that it's here. Mission Impossible Final Reckoning was certainly a reckoning. So this next adventure follows Ethan Hunt, a now messianic figure, as a lot of plot happens and occasionally an action scene or two. If you can't tell, I wasn't a big fan of this movie. There was barely a moment where I was completely on board with the film, and that's a real shame because I am a big fan of this franchise. But Final Reckoning gets so bogged down with self-importance that I lost interest 30 minutes in and I never gained it back. And I don't want to act like that's entirely out of the ordinary. Even the best Mission Impossible movies get caught up in plot for sure, but usually it's more balanced and serves something greater. Final Reckoning is just people in rooms speaking seriously about technobabble and finishing each other's sentences in a way that, at least to my mind, was incomprehensible. For being 2 hours and 50 minutes, it had less action than Dead Reckoning, and it could make up for it if it felt like a true completion of the franchise, but how it wraps things up seems rushed and melodramatic. Like, I know that Ethan Hunt is a really cool and awesome guy. Did I need 2 hours of this film's runtime to just drill that fact into me? I know some people aren't as bothered by this movie as me, and my opinion will probably even out as time passes, but whenever I left that theater, I was not the happiest camper, so much so that the next day I watched Mission Impossible Fallout. And it's kind of odd how much more successful a movie Fallout is. In terms of cast, location, filmmaking, the screenplay, Fallout just nails it. I would say that it's a little bit long, but I think this movie is a much better exploration of what makes Ethan Hunt special. And it doesn't do it by stripping away his humanity, it does it by leaning into it. The last act of Fallout is the perfect mix of character and action when it comes to these films. And I feel like it's probably the second best action movie of the decade. So whenever the Mission Impossible franchise starts back up again, which I'm sure that it will, I hope the filmmakers look more to Fallout than to Final Reckoning. Okay, so after two movies about preventing nuclear holocausts, I kind of wanted something a little bit smaller, and so I landed on Rye Lane. This was a Sundance darling a couple years ago, and I liked it then, and I still like it now. The story here is a very simple yet thoughtful walk and talk with two charismatic 20-year-olds who are obviously destined to fall in love. And while you would think the filmmaking here would be pretty standard, it is everything but. This is about as stylistic as you can get with a rom-com in terms of shot composition, lighting, and also humor. Like, it's kind of hard to jump straight into Rye Lane. It took me probably 15 minutes to fully adjust to what rainy Alan Miller was doing behind the camera, but once I did, I was all about it. I think the film slightly loses steam after the first day ended as it moves into a semi-epilogue, but the ending still left me satisfied, and I will be patiently waiting to see what Miller does next, even if it's half as charming as this. Bring Her Back is the sophomore feature from the Philippines, the guy behind Talk to Me, and is a really fucked up movie. Now, Bring Her Back and Talk to Me are really interesting first two films from these guys because thematically, they're both pretty much talking about the same thing, just through different social issues. With Talk to Me obviously being about addiction and vices, and Bring Her Back featuring commentary on the adoption system and child abuse. And you know, whenever I said that I wanted more good movies about adoption, I guess that this is that. Just not in the way that I intended, because this is a stark, harrowing, and disturbing film, even more so than Talk to Me. Like, sometimes I like to show people really fucked up movies because it can be kind of fun, but not with the violence in this film. The gore in this movie is genuinely unsettling, and I do think it is because the characters are so well written, and as horror does well, it really is just an exaggeration of real things. But, and I know that this might come as a shock, I laughed a lot in the first hour of this film. And it's because this movie is very much tapped into the way that people act. By the end of this year, I'm sure that Sally Hawkins will be deserving of a supporting actress nom, but you know, she ain't gonna get it. So hopefully my enjoyment of her performance is enough of a prize, which, you know, I'm sure that it totally is. I think Bring Her Back was a sincerely messed up, emotional horror film that had way more depth than Talk to Me, and while it might be too intense for most people, I also think that it has a lot to say to those that are willing to give it a chance. But seriously, if you're interested in seeing this film but haven't really dipped your toe into a lot of horror yet, look up a content guide for this film because it's a lot better to be spoiled than to be disturbed and scarred. I think that that's true. All right, well, all good things come to an end, and this, you know, this is that end. So I'll see you whenever, you know, whenever I see you.